Alrighty, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Um, we are here with another round of Astro-Babble, ready for another day of live videos. Thank you, everybody who's about to jump on. I appreciate you very, very much. We have another 8 charts that we're going to be doing this morning. Thank you to everybody who has been sending in your birth date, place, and exact birth time. That is how we get these charts. And then we run with it. I have these 8 charts that I ran in my Astro software, haven't looked at them. We're going to cold read them, talk about themes in astrology, talk about the 8 people that have lovingly donated their lives to science, to this lovely activity, which I've been doing for a couple weeks now. If you'd like to check out the previous live streams, you can find them on Facebook or check out the YouTube channel, which I link to after every live stream via the Facebook Live, or just search Scorpio Rising Astrology. I know there's a lot of astro stuff on YouTube, so check the direct link if you can't find it. And yeah, if you're interested in consults, you can always check out ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, my website, or hit me up via Instagram or Facebook. Yeah. So let's pop open a fizzy water and get to it, shall we? Okie dokie. Kelly is our first chart. Hey, Kelly, how you doing? She was born at 12 p.m. at Oklahoma City. We need to be careful with that birth time, though, Kelly, because your ascendant is at 4 degrees of Aquarius. Whenever I see an even number birth time, so like 12 p.m., 1 p.m., 2 a.m., I'm always suspicious because nobody is really born on the dot that frequently. So they're kind of guesstimating. And in some charts, especially if the ascendant is within those first 5 degrees, we need to be very, very cautious of the birth time, because just, 5 to 10 minutes later, and that guesstimate changes the entire chart. So just to be aware of that, especially if you submit your info for these live streams and you're wondering like, wow, that doesn't really sound like me. It could be that we have the birth time incorrect and we need to redo the chart with something a little bit more accurate. Birth certificates are great for that. Family is great for that. So just be aware of that, Kelly. Finger guns. Let's go ahead to that 4-degree Scorpio ascendant ruled by Saturn in the 12th in Capricorn. So it is in its dignity. But we do have the Lord of the chart in the 12th house of hidden enemies. We've talked about that before in the Astro-Babble live streams, where when the Lord of the chart or the sun is in that 12th house, it indicates self-sabotage, because the planet or the identifier of the person is in that 12th house of hidden enemies, meaning that the person is their own worst enemy. And that can be a little bit of a difficult placement, especially when we have Uranus here and Neptune here. The idea that a lot of the chaos Kelly succumbs to, a lot of the misinformation Kelly succumbs to, there's a lot of outer planet activity in that 12th house of hidden enemies, where it just seems like sometimes the universe is conspiring against Kelly, but it's really her own self-talk, her own interpretation of what's happening, as opposed to kind of that martyr or that victim mentality. We just need to surround Kelly with people, places, things that are a little bit more uplifting, a little bit more encouraging, people that see the value in her, see the good in her. And especially with an Aquarius ascendant ruled by Saturn in Capricorn, there's a good level of sternness that Kelly can bring to the table. And unfortunately, Saturn ruling the natal chart does bring a little bit of that sternness into a negative space. So self-criticizing and being self-critical in general, not something ideal. However, if Kelly were to walk into chaos right now, she would be able to master it, because she knows what that feels like. She knows what to do in those situations. She's actually heavily equipped to say no to things as well, which I think is a beautiful skill to have, especially when people are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. People with that Saturn ruled ascendant really have that ability to separate the wheat from the chaff in those situations of extreme chaos, and be that defining factor that allows people to categorize things when things seem out of control. Let's see. We have that moon in Sagittarius up in the 11th house. That's a really friendly placement. I enjoy that. The 11th house is that house of friendships and social groups whenever we find the moon here. That's always just a really nice friendship placement. We also have Venus in Sag here, Mercury in Sag here. That's a very social dynamic that Kelly has brought into her chart. And I think that that offsets a lot of the self work that we've already seen in her chart. She's put a lot of heavy strain on her own persona, on her own personality, on who she is as a person. But then she's complemented that with 3 really great planetary placements up in the 11th house of friendship so that she does surround herself with the right people, places, and things. So that's great. We do have the sun in Scorpio. So the sun in Scorpio is up in the 10th house, very close to the MC. MC is at 23, sun is at 27. Pluto in Scorpio is also here. Where's that Mars that's ruling that? Oh, that's fun. Mars is down in Gemini opposing Mercury and ruling the 10th house via that 5th house of creativity, sexuality, parents, lots of good stuff in that space. So one of the things that we see with that 5th house and that 10th house connection is Kelly might be known for her creativity. She might find a lot of success there, especially in the writing field, because that Mars does rule her 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, as well as siblings. Because that 5th house of creativity and or parents and kind of creating her own family is linked to her siblings and her 10th house of career success. Wouldn't surprise me if she actually finds that her siblings join her in her creative endeavors, or allow the creativity of that 5th house to really spill into her family dynamic, where she might find some really nice support for what she does. But we do have that 5th house ruling the 10th house. So she's going to be known for her creativity. There's a lot of power that she holds, specifically because the ruler of the 10th is in the 5th in the creative space. So Kelly, if there is a way to really mitigate your chart, I think it's by accessing that 5th house Mars and Gemini. We could really do some good damage. And by good damage, I mean like knocking down the walls that you've set up around yourself to prevent you from being happy. We could really do some good damage to those walls by creating and by manipulating artistic mediums, and by potentially engaging in childcare or volunteering with children. Working in that 5th house, I think, to unlock your creativity is probably the best move for your chart specifically. We do have that 10th house Pluto placement, though, as well as the sun. So fame and success is something that Kelly's highly identified with. It's something that she knows is coming down the pipeline. However, Pluto is that planet that matures halfway through life. So when we activate that sun, that ego, it's really going to be attached to that Pluto maturing. So the first half of life is really kind of Kelly learning how to do the things, how to be the person that she's supposed to be. And then halfway through the life, that Pluto will kick in. She'll step into her power and she'll really realize the badass that she is, because that Pluto in the 10th, that's some serious power, that's some serious fame that will come down the pipeline, especially in that 5th house creativity space that I think is really, really beautiful. Cool. So that's Kelly's chart. Hey, everybody joining on, Brandy, Angel, Marie, Sandy, Albert, Fatima, Charlotte. Thank you, everybody, for joining on. I appreciate you. Thank you, everybody on Instagram who's also joining on and watching as well. Let's continue down the chart lineup, shall we? So we're already almost 10 minutes in. Okay. Oh, that is the wrong chart. Okay. So we have Blaze next. Blaze was born 5:17 p.m. in Des Moines. Des Moines. Let's go ahead and look at that that chart. So we have the ascendant in Capricorn. So another Saturn-ruled chart. Hilarious. Wow, Blaze and Kelly actually have a lot in common in terms of their personal power struggles. So we have here the South Node conjunct the Ascendant, which is pretty difficult. I'm not going to lie. wherever the south node is placed, there's an energy suck in the chart. There's just this quicksand that opens up and it swallows a lot of resources, it swallows a lot of energy, it swallows a lot of motivation. And to have that so close to the ascendant in the first house of the body, especially in the Capricorn sign, which rules the joints, the bones, the teeth. There might be a loss of teeth early in life. There might be broken bones. There might be brittle bones as well. From a medical astrology standpoint, weak joints. But I'm a little bit more concerned about that from a personality standpoint, because it's almost like putting a black hole over your sense of self. So just like Kelly, we need to surround Blaze with people, places, things that are a little bit more constructive, a little bit more helpful, a little bit more supportive in nature, because Blaze's south node right on the ascendant is a little bit of that personality suck that brings his chart down a notch, which we don't really like to see. On the positive side, though, he's got this sun in Virgo with Mercury in Virgo up in the ninth. Super intellectual. That's fun. Like that's a really strong placement to counterbalance the South Node. I think that uh, gosh, that Mercury. So Mercury in Virgo is in the sign of its exaltation. It loves to be in Virgo, and to put that in the ninth house of topics like spirituality, higher learning, foreigners, travel. There's so much goodness there, and I really enjoy seeing that because I think Blaze has a lot of mental prowess. I think he can really navigate those realms very, very well. We need to be careful though, because that sun and that Mercury do tend to be comfortable bedfellows, but when we find too many personal planets in Virgo with that Capricorn ascendant, again, we get too much of that earthy vibe, which can bring denseness, it can bring pickiness, it can bring the ability to say no, not just to other people, but to oneself. And especially with Saturn ruling the charts, like Blaze finds too many opportunities to say no to life's pleasures, is a good way to say it. However, However, a twist, a twist. We have Jupiter in Scorpio, Mars in Scorpio, and the Moon in Scorpio, all in the 11th. So the friends that Blaze does tend to keep have that Scorpio tendency to them. They're big Scorpios, nasty Scorpios. And I say nasty with all the affection of a Scorpio rising with Pluto on the ascendant. Like I love my Scorpio people. But when we see a stockpile of Scorpio-ness in the 11th house, especially with Mars there, which tends to be pretty malefic, Blaze's friend choice is really, really interesting. Slightly dark, slightly underworldy, potentially aggressive, very grandiose. For very few of you will get this reference, but it's very Team Skull from Pokemon Sun and Moon. It's that overly dark but very gaudy kind of Italian mob gangster feel, but grungy is a good way to say it with Blaze's friend choice. But that's also where his heart is. His moon is there, so there's a certain amount of comfort because again, I think he settles in the toxicity of that self-deprecation really, really well. That is something that we need to pull him out of, and I think that ninth house is the key to do that in terms of reaching for the stars intellectually and really putting the mind to work. But it's a lot easier to sulk. It's a lot easier to succumb to that dark viscous fluid, that pit of tar that just kind of slowly sinks you under. But that's not necessarily where Blaze's chart is going. I think that the harmony comes when we examine his north node up in the 7th, which is at 12 degrees, trining his Mars at 12 degrees in Scorpio. I think that with all of the counterbalances with his chart talk about the personality being in detriment, being able to say no more than he says yes. However, when we look at that north node in the 7th, a lot of what his friendship circles need to do is to get on his level on a low side in order to bring him up to the high side. So if he doesn't experience what true low is, if he doesn't hit that rock bottom that Scorpio loves to delve deep down into, he's not going to be able to respect his life path, which is actually that north node in the 7th, ruled by the moon in the 11th, trining that Mars in the 11th, which is finding spousal connections and long-term intimacy via the friendships that are a little bit awkward and dark and slightly seedy. However, there's this kind of oh goodness, what's that movie about the really, really smart young girl? Oh goodness, I can't think of it. But there's this savant tendency in Blaze's chart that I really, really enjoy seeing. The Lord of his chart, Saturn, is also up with Pluto in Libra in the 10th. So there is a lot of good fame here. There's a lot of good success here. There's a lot of good markers for striving that come halfway through the life if he survives past those dark and treacherous traps that both his friends and he set for himself. We just need to be slightly aware that he's meant to be dabbling in forces that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with, that are slightly dangerous. However, if we work with those forces constructively, the relationships that come out of that will be more powerful than anybody could ever imagine. Yeah, so that's some really interesting stuff in Blaze's chart. Cool. Let's go ahead and look at Kelly. Thanks again. Hard time believing I was born. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what we just need to be aware of, Kelly, is timing. Hello, Jennifer. Hello, everybody on Instagram joining in. Thank you so much for joining me for another round of Astro-Babble. If you would like to submit your chart, please send me your birth date, place, and exact birth time via Messenger. Do not post your birth date info in the comments because that's a violation of privacy, and we will keep your privacy safe by only mentioning your first name and your time of birth and place. So let's go ahead and move to the next chart. Next, we have Ruth. Ruthie baby. We have her born at 12:05 a.m. in Michigan. Weird. Another Saturn-ruled ascendant. That seems to be the theme of the day. So I guess we need to talk about that a little bit. When we have Aquarius or Capricorn on the ascendant is the personality marker. It's the place in the chart that dictates who we are as people. And a lot of people say, well, isn't your sun sign that? And it is to a certain degree. But the sun and the moon represent different parts of the personality that I think need to be understood a little bit more fully, as opposed to like popular astro stuff. So the sun represents our sense of self that we radiate, how we give, the sun that we choose to become in our outer world, how we radiate into our space. The moon is more of that subconscious emotional sense of self. It's what we need. It's how we receive. It's our deeper desires, right? The ascendant is who we are. It is the helm of the chart. It is the part of your astrological makeup that is the most you, as opposed to your projective self or your receptive self. The ascendant is the piece of you that is the most you. Yeah, without the projection, yeah, or the receptiveness. So when we find a ascendant ruled by Saturn, we have a very Saturnian flavor to the self. That could be physically, in terms of the first 20 to 30 years of life, that the body is very frail, the body is very sickly, the body is very slow to grow, which is a very Saturnine feature, especially around the bones, the joints, the marrow, the teeth. But when we find the ascendant ruled by Saturn, it's a self that is categorized by those Saturnian qualities of frugalness, of lack, of saying no, both to oneself and to others. Again, that deprecating tendency. Somebody who tends to be a little bit of a wet blanket, but not necessarily because of fear or because they're going out of their way to be rude, but because of practicality. Sometimes it's just not practical to drink a bunch of wine and get stoned with your friends, honey. No. And people with those Aquarius and Capricorn ascendant with Saturn ruled charts are very much those friends who will say, no, I don't think this is for your highest good. And they'll say it sometimes in a harsh way, but it's because they care about you and because they're really playing the long game as opposed to the short game. Very intellectual, very standoffish, but also very strong personalities, but normally personalities that tend to mature around 30 and then really come into their prime around 60. They're the wines of the zodiac. They tend to get better as they age. So we have Ruth here. Ruth here with her Aquarius ascendant. She has her Saturn in Cancer over in the 6th house of work, health, and pets, which means that she highly identifies with the healthcare field, animals, as well as she tends to be a little bit of a workaholic because, again, the Lord of her chart is in that 6th house of work. She also has Mars in Cancer here in the 6th, which gives her an incredibly powerful work ethic. that mama bear tendency that Mars in Cancer tends to bring to the surface is very strong in her. She's very protective of her people. She's very protective of her own health and wellness as well. We just need to be aware that Mars and Saturn, both in the sixth house, do tend to bring drying qualities, especially to the stomach, because Cancer is the sign of the stomach, but also the breasts when it comes to fertility and the reproductive organs. When a woman is pregnant, Cancer takes over that because of the mothering quality. Saturn and Mars, Saturn being cold and dry energetic, Mars being hot and dry energetic. There's this cold, hot, but universally dry energetic influence to the stomach with Ruth. So we really need to make sure that all foods are moistening, all foods are temperature regulating, so not too spicy, but not too freezing. But that moisture really needs to be present in the stomach for Ruth, because that's a major chart indicator that she has for her specifically. We do have Sun in Gemini, South Node Gemini, Mercury in Gemini. Whenever we see a stockpile in Gemini, especially with the South Node in the fifth house plus Sun influences, yeah, that's rough. That's going to be a little bit hypermobile to the heart and the spine, as well as the arms and nerves. So there's tendency for anxiety disorders medically. There's tendency for like a heart valve that won't close, or scoliosis, or something where the spine is a little bit too hypermobile, the heart is a little bit too hypermobile, the nerves are a little bit too hypermobile, and there's that south node which sucks the energy. Creatively, there's a lot of all over the placeness in Ruth's chart. Potential to give birth to two children or twins because of Gemini, fifth house being children, but also the idea of that creative energy of the fifth house being super duper Gemini, all over the place. I want to do this, but I also want to do this exact opposite thing over here. I want to do them all at the same time, plus 5 other pots that I have on the stove. Let's make this happen. And unfortunately, there's not enough drive in the chart, and it kind of contradicts the nature of her chart in general to be so slow, so systematic, so thoughtful, so present, so grounded, and then to have this really airy creativity over here, talking a mile a minute in her ear. That's a little bit of a muse that needs to be grounded. We need to storyboard all those ideas, and then pick one, maybe half of one, and execute it properly. And that's kind of something that I see with the loaded Gemini fifth house. When the ascendant is a little bit too grounded, there's a conflict there. There is a Virgo moon that's present up in the 8th house, which is separating but still in an opposition to Jupiter and Pisces in the 2nd. Really good at managing other people's money because, well, yeah, I mean, really good at managing other people's money. I would say that she's not necessarily good at managing her own, but Jupiter in Pisces is a really good sign to have in the financial house of wealth. It is a little bit watery, so the wealth might necessarily not be financial, but it is going to be in the form of love, appreciation, psychic influences, all those things that Pisces tends to represent, going to be loaded, which we would love to transform into some physical income, but we'll see whether or not that actually pans out. Because again, that moon in Virgo really does very well with business, really does well with finance, but other people's money, not necessarily one's own. We have House of Family ruled by Venus and Aries in the 3rd, which is then ruling that 9th house of higher education. There's a lot of education in the family. There's a lot of really strong scholarship tendencies in the family dynamic, especially when it comes to siblings. Almost a competitiveness, I would say, to finish school first, to get the grades. There's a real scholastic achievement slant to Ruth's chart that I think is super interesting. I could talk about charts all day, but I know we're wrapping up on time. So thank you, Ruth, for sending in your chart before I spend all of the time working on one. Yes, Alex, Wines of the Zodiac. That's totally good. I love that. Totally not something I've ever said before. Okay, let's go to Megan. Megan was born at 4:30 p.m. in Jackson. And she breaks the chain. We don't have a Saturn ruled ascendant. We have a Libra ascendant, so Venus is the queen of the chart, as it were. The ascendant at 6 degrees is being ruled by Venus up in Gemini in the ninth. So there's a natural inclination of a love for travel, foreign culture, higher learning, loving the scholastic experience. Venus in Gemini. Venus in Gemini is a fun placement to have in the ninth. It's somebody who is just the perpetual schoolgirl. Um, I enjoy that energy specifically. I think it's fun. I think it's a little bit flighty, but not too flighty because there's that intellectual prowess behind it. Venus, although she is beautiful and she is gracious, she's no fool. Especially in Gemini ruling the ascendant up in the ninth. There is this really heady aspect to Venus and Gemini where I mean she'll play the innocent schoolgirl and she'll be all kawaii this and um cuteness that. But when we look at Venus and Gemini up in the ninth specifically of higher learning, there's a sharpness to the wit and the intellect. And as I say this, Megan, I must tell you this. There's a cardinal in the hibiscus bush outside of my window chirping like crazy. So cardinal medicine, totally yours. Let's channel that through for 2 seconds. Absolutely beautiful. They came through yesterday for me and obviously supposed to pass on that message to you. Beautiful red male cardinal just chirping away right in front of the window as I say that. Yeah, so that's beautiful. We do have Mars in Cancer with the MC and the South Node up in the 10th. That's a little bit problematic. We also have Saturn in Aquarius, its rulership in the 5th, with the moon ruling that 10th. Ooh, we have some conflicting information here. When it comes to family, that fourth house of family being ruled by the fifth house of children and parenting, but then going up to the 10th, I think there's a real struggle to balance the family dynamic in your chart, Megan. I think that you'd love nothing more to be successful, but your definition of success needs to constantly be rewritten because what you think is best for you is not always best for you. And that's very much the Mars in Cancer coming through in your 10th with the South Node. Like success always seems elusive and it's because your priorities are a little bit mixed up and we need to rectify those like pronto. The moon in Aquarius in the 5th with Saturn really speaks towards your need to be constructively creative and almost like you locking yourself up in a tower creative where you're isolated from everybody else and you can really make some amazing things happen over time, but you can't necessarily socially connect with people the way that you'd like to because of that isolation. But that's also where you're the most productive, right? You'd love to have a family, but the family gets in the way. You'd love to have success, but fame gets in the way. And I think that that's part of the issue here is you need to be creative, and that's a big part of your chart because the moon is here, but that creativity isn't necessarily going to be the way that other people are creative. You're not going to be able to have the family dynamic that everybody else has had because the way that you need to function for you is different than other people need to function for them, right? So I think that almost like that Rapunzel analogy, very, very fitting for your chart because that Venus in Gemini is that scholar. Like if you could be locked up in that tower surrounded by your books, your beakers, your scientific equipment, all of your stencils, your charts, your things that you use to create the magic that you create, I think that that would be absolutely lovely. Unfortunately, you also need to be a human, and there are human things that you need to do as well. And those human things not necessarily ideal for your style of creative process. So balancing that is going to be just a little bit tricky. However, should you overcome that and should you balance those things, the more you share your creativity with the world, the more you'll actually activate your seventh house of relationships, potentially finding a nice Aries man, somebody who's very inspiring, very aggressive, slightly competitive, but also intellectual because Mercury in Aries is here. To help shelter you, protect you, as well as congratulate you once you take the stage and unlock all of your creative achievements. And money issues don't worry about them. They'll happen halfway through the life. Okay. So we are about 30 minutes in. We're about halfway through the chart. We're making good time. Let me pause for a second. If you would like to submit your personal chart to the lineup, feel free to send your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private messenger. I need you to spell out the month and day as well, especially for my people who are overseas, because we've had some confusion with months and days being mixed up due to some countries putting the month before the day and that. So yeah, do that. And if you would like to schedule a consult or work with me privately, maybe take a class or two, you can always go to scorpiorisingastrology.com, which is my website. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Let's go to Shirley. Shirley was born in at 4:24 a.m. in Newton. We have a Pisces ascendant this time around, making ooh, Shirley, girl. Oh, that's fun. Oh, I like you, Shirley. So Shirley's ascendant is in Pisces, making Jupiter the ruler of her chart, right? Jupiter being the ruler of the chart is fun because Jupiter is the most benefic planet that we have. It's known for its luck. It's known for its resources. It's known for being abundant. It's known for being regal. So there's that flavor to it. Then we have the moon here in Pisces as well in the first house, making emotions very, very high. But the cool thing about Shirley's chart is that she's not only ruled by Jupiter, but she's ruled by Jupiter in Sagittarius up in the 10th house of success. So fame coming to Shirley, definitely part of the makeup here. Now, here's the downside to that. The downside of that is this Jupiter in Sagittarius is retrograde, meaning that the planet was appearing to be going backwards in the sky. The planets don't actually go backwards. We just perceive them going backwards because they've slowed down in their orbit. But when we see Jupiter going retrograde in the 10th house, it means that success might come, might go as quickly as it comes, or it might come in a way that is detrimental to Shirley or feels detrimental at the time. But that unwanted success is part of the flavor of that 10th house Jupiter in Sagittarius. The success will be there whether she wants it or not, because Jupiter makes things big and is in the house of success and its proper domicile, ruling the ascendant. Like, that's super powerful mojo. But because Jupiter is retrograde, there might be an unwillingness to participate in that success, which I don't think is necessarily constructive. There are other things. So let's move on to other things, shall we? We have the Mercury in Aries at 2 degrees, making a trine to that Jupiter at 1 degree in Sagittarius. But Mercury is also retrograde in the 2nd house of finance. We have the South Node in Aries in the house of finance, as well as the Sun in Aries in the 2nd house of finance. Money issues, big thing. Money issues, especially when connected with fame, big thing. Family potentially being resentful of fame. That's interesting. Whenever we see the 4th house and the 2nd house connected, because Mars is in Gemini, Mercury retrograde in Aries, they're swapping signs, they have a mutual reception. That means that money and finance are connected to the family dynamic, but because Mercury is retrograde, that connection might necessarily not be ideal. Money might need to be given to the family and might actually drain finances as quickly as they come. And that fame might actually, here's the story. Like, Shirley achieves success at a very, very early age. The money comes in, the money is lost as quickly as it is acquired because family needs it instead of her. She never sees a cent of that money, and money becomes this competitive thing that Shirley's chasing her entire life. But never seems to really get a handle on. Despite the sun being in Aries, there's a good chance that the energy is there. Money quickly comes to her, but it's this idea that she loses it as quickly as she gets it because of that South Node placement. The North Node being in Libra, ruled by Venus in the 3rd, is a really interesting counterbalance to that, though, because we have the North Node in the 8th house of entrepreneurship, death and taxes and estates as well, other people's money, being ruled by Venus in the 3rd, of siblings, of communication, of teaching. neighborhoods. What would be really interesting for me to see in Shirley's chart if she takes her experiences with fame and she actually turns into some sort of local coach, some sort of local advisor. She writes about her experiences with fame early on in childhood, with money early on in childhood, and she actually starts to own her own business practices, and she starts to become a little bit more of an entrepreneur. She starts to take control of her own money and the money of others by potentially contracting out work instead of doing all the work herself, and really flipping the tides. Where as she might have been used for her charisma, her talent, her uniqueness, which the family then took advantage of, but then she's able to pivot that experience around over time and use it in a writing, teaching, creative way, which activates her eighth house placements of more sustainable money through others. That's fun. We also have that Mercury in Aries retrograde ruling that seventh house of relationships. Yeah, we need to go into this, but we can't go into this too much because Pluto is also here. But the idea that spousal connections are also connected to finance, the person that Shirley chooses to have in her life will also be financially beneficial for her and will be an area that she receives a good chunk of her income from. It wouldn't surprise me if she also chooses to work in the financial field or work a lot with money, because that Sun in Aries in the second house of finance is ruling her sixth house of work, health, as well as pets. Uranus is in that sixth house, so work being unpredictable, health being unpredictable as well, especially from a heart, cardiovascular, spine, eye perspective, because those are the body systems that Leo rules. And then we also have Uranus and Leo in the sixth house of pets, is just crazy animals, absolutely crazy animals who think that they're especially animals that take on a very Leo quality, who are very lion-like, who are constantly prowling. They might be bigger than normal, exotic pets potentially, because Uranus tends to bring things that are unpredictable. Or even adopting strays or animals that have been abandoned, because that Uranus is retrograde in the sixth. So that's a fun chunk of Shirley's chart. I think that's really good. Oh yeah, that's good. So last note, Shirley, before we close off on your chart, you do have Saturn in Capricorn up in the 11th, which is a great place for Saturn to be in your chart because it really grounds you. So we have these friends and these social groups which are very down to earth, which are very much about, again, like we talked about, Saturn ruling the ascendant, people telling you no when you need to be told no, people who are actually on your side, those friends in that 11th house, really taking a Saturnian slant with you and saying, look, I know that you think you should do this. I know you think this is for your best interest. I'm here as your friend to tell you don't do that. And surrounding yourself with a good tribe of advisors overall. Although that Saturn does rule the 12th house of hidden enemies, so we do need to be very aware that that no can also be self-serving to your friends, whether that's them being able to spend more time with you or potentially a little bit more vindictively kind of getting into your inner circle for reasons that they benefit from but you do not. But regardless, that Saturnian influence will still be there, and I think that that's helpful for your chart. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the props for the consult that you enjoyed with me. If you would like to submit your chart, please feel free to private message me your birth date, place, and the exact birth time. I do need that exact birth time. Astrology is very time specific, so if we don't have an exact time, I can't run an accurate chart for you. But we can always rectify a chart privately. So if you're not sure of your birth time within an hour or so, we can always flip through a couple options and settle on a chart based on questions that I ask, timing techniques and things of that nature. Okay, let's look at Adriana. Adriana, my darling, my love. Let's look at her 8 p.m. chart where she was born in Monterey. Okie dokie. We got a Sagittarius ascendant. Sagittarius ascendant is great because again, Jupiter is the ruler of the chart. Jupiter ruling the chart means that there's a big personality. Jupiter ruling the chart, also the luckiest planet ruling the chart, is really great. However, Jupiter is in the fifth house of creativity. Big creativity, massive amount of creativity, cannot be more creative, especially because Jupiter is in Aries, so there's a very competitive nature to the creativity. And that 21 degree Jupiter, it's in a trine to the ascendant. I mean, there's just so much fire in the chart already. Goodness. We have Uranus here in that first house. Uranus in the first house of South retrograde, Saturn in Sagittarius in the first house retrograde. So I think that there are an interesting blend of obstacles that Adriana has put in her own way to temper her fire. Not necessarily good, but especially in early ages, things that she might have realized helped her down the line. So there's a sense of flightiness because Uranus is all about bringing the unpredictable into the self. Uranus is also known to create lightning storms and electrical outages and natural disasters. So when we find Uranus in that first house of self, there's an idea of not necessarily self-sabotage, but always being in the wrong place at the wrong time, being caught up in those personal storms. And potential electrical circuiting that goes wrong in the liver and the hips, because those are the two major body systems that Sagittarius rules. Saturn also being in the first house, not necessarily great for the body, because Saturn makes things slow, withered, a little bit thinner than they should be. Saturn that close to the ascendant in Sagittarius makes me worry about the liver, especially from a blood sugar perspective. Not necessarily ideal for those body systems. But again, from a personality standpoint, this is where all of that heat gets tempered. Like if she was this massive ball of fire that was just rocketing through space and time with all that creativity, she might potentially do damage to herself and others. So she's put this barrier in terms of Saturn, that restrictive planet of no. And then she's put Uranus here, which is kind of that unpredictable element of, I know that you were going this way, but there's this crazy storm that's going to pick you up in a tornado, and it's just going to send you to the opposite end of the course over there. So you have to backtrack and do it all again. So that's an interesting personal dynamic that's just right off the bat. Because that North Node is in Aries, we find that creativity is actually a really big part of Adriana's chart. However, we do have some interesting aspects from a rulership perspective. We do have both the Jupiter in Aries and the North Node in Aries ruled by Mars in that 8th house of death, taxes, estates. Creative entrepreneurship is probably the highest expression of that placement. On the lower octave of that astrological experience, we do have Mars, which tends to cause injury, Mars, which tends to cause bleeding, in that 8th house of death, ruling that 5th house of children and parents. So we find that connection, and on a lower end, potentially dealing with the death of children, potentially dealing with the death of parents in a rather violent way. We need to just be aware that that's also part of the chart makeup technically. And one of the weakest points of Adriana's chart is should her children or her offspring become injured, it would absolutely crush her. So that's one of the things that we need to be aware of. We do have mediumship qualities in the chart, though, because that Mercury in Cancer is really, really nice in the 8th. Again, very good with business, shrewd with business, potentially very competitive and aggressive with business. I think that all that fire channeled into a Mars in Cancer is really, really a nice way to be aggressively diplomatic about any creative venture that you take on. And Mercury in Cancer here, very, very thorough with contracts. Very protective with contracts when it concerns your friends and other people. That's nice. I like that. Sun and Gemini in the 7th, the love to be loved, really. When we put the Sun, which represents the ego, in that 7th house of relationships, there is, without a relationship in your life, you feel incomplete. However, when you are in a relationship, it can really create a sense of stillness for your personality that you won't find without it. That's both has that has drawbacks, you know. Over identification with a partner can lead to, especially some of those Gemini tendencies getting out of control. Going into business with a partner, because that Gemini in Cancer in the 8th house of entrepreneurship is connected to the 7th house of relationships. I think that's a thing. Let's see, what else do we have? We have Venus and Taurus in that 6th house of work, health, and pets, potentially raising large farm animals because of Taurus being in that, Venus and Taurus specifically being in that 6th house of pets, doing very good in that department. Venus is also ruling that moon at 0 degrees, very, very exact, to in that 11th house of friendships. We need to be careful with birth time on that, because at 0 degrees 18 clicks in literally a couple minutes either way, and we would push that deeper into Libra or put it back into Virgo in the 10th. So that Venus in the 6th ruling that moon in the 11th, very, very fascinating when it comes to working with large groups and communities, working with humanitarian efforts, working with, again, tribes being a big heartfelt space for Adriana to put her makeup in. However, we do have the South Node here, so she already knows how to do that. It's not necessarily something that she's personally striving towards. It's just something that she does really well because she gets it. She gets how the group consciousness works as a whole. But her true focus in life this time around is that North Node in the 5th house of creativity, parenting, and children. That's where her chart really lies. And although we have issues with death and issues with relationships, there is that Venus and Taurus in the 6th, which I think saves it all, because she's such a hard worker. And she really brings a lot of healing, because Venus rules healing in the health house, as well as working with pets and animals. That Venus and Taurus in the 6th house of pets, absolutely beautiful placement there. And I think that that's what tempers all of the fire, is that universal compassion that nobody else can really match when it comes to work ethic. The desire to heal and taking care of animals who would not be able to take care of themselves. So that's fun. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ricky. Good morning, everybody jumping on Instagram as well. At Scorpio Rising Astrology is my handle there. We have just a couple more charts. If you would like to submit your chart to the queue, please feel free to send your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private message, and we will add you to the queue, the long list that we have for the queue. We have 2 more charts, and how are we doing on time? 2 more charts, 15 minutes to go. Okay, about 7 minutes each. That's fun. Let's do that. Okie dokie. And we have Heather Honey, who was born at 3:10 a.m. in Tampa. Let's go ahead and take a look at her chart. Boom, Libra stellium in the 3rd. That's fun. We have the ascendant in Leo ruling that sun placement in Libra. Ooh, Mercury cazimi in the 3rd too. Ooh, goodness, we got stuff to unpack here. All of that is really fascinating, because we also have the South Node on top of the ascendant, which is clearly a theme here. Over the past couple charts, we've really had it. Man, she just, wow, all of this partnership dynamic in her chart. She has the South Node on her ascendant. She has Mars conjoined her North Node in the 7th. She's got her moon conjoining Saturn up in the 11th. She's got, which is opposing her Jupiter conjoining Neptune down in the 5th. And then she's got this Libra stellium in the 3rd. There's just this idea in her chart of like, never be alone. Never be alone. Cannot stand being alone. Wow, that's really crazy. How everything is paired. Nothing is solo. Yeah, I think there might be some karma stuff there, like for sure. Because that's I've seen that once before, but just all the planets being paired like that really speak towards codependency, dependency in general. Not necessarily ideal, but interesting. Like, yeah, wow, I'm here for it. But let's talk about that Libra stellium. Her chart is also so neat. There's nothing outlying about it. Everything is in its own little box. Everything is so categorized. Everything is there's nothing on the exact degree. Everything's just packaged ever so sweetly in these little boxes. It's as if she's gone in with tweezers and specifically placed all of her planets in this mise en place, which is really quite fun to look at. Unfortunately, I can't share it visually because Facebook and Instagram won't let me screen share and go live at the same time. Get on it, social media. So let's go ahead and talk about that stellium. Whenever we find a Libra stellium, there is a peacekeeping mentality that's very strong in the person. There is a social justice warrior that's very strong in the person. We have somebody who believes in fairness with every bone in their body, who prefers all things to be equal, who prefers all things to be balanced, and somebody who is very good at both judging chaos and being a source of opportunity and light and healing in times of great strife, but then also somebody who on the flip side to that tends to get so wrapped up in finding a cause to fight for that they can potentially self-sabotage and create their own problems as well. Because we have the sun in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, over-identification, and owning the title of author, teacher, writer is going to be a very big part of this chart. We also have Venus here in Libra, which is just, it's a goddess placement. It's just lovely. All of the words that she speaks, everything that she thinks just has this Venusian grace to it. Especially because we have Venus in Cazimi with the sun, Mercury, or not Venus, Mercury in Cazimi with the sun. Mercury is heightened to the nth degree, also being ruled by Venus, who is out of combustion. Like, man, so good, these placements. We do have Pluto here, we do have Uranus here, so there's an unpredictability to the writing, teaching, communication. There is that element of maybe using words in a way to shake things up, to be a little bit more, not necessarily frictionless, but a little bit more revolutionary is a good word for that. We also have Pluto in Libra in that third house. So writing is something that will gradually mature over time. It's something that she'll get better and better and better at as she gets older. It's something that I honestly, getting halfway through the life and turning 50, with all these placements already so perfectly oriented in that third house, I'm scared and also in awe of what that could be moving forward as your gifts mature. That's crazy beauty right off the bat in that writing, teaching, communication house. For it to get even better as you age is going to be ridiculous. I'm so excited to see how that turns out, how that continues to unfold in your life, because there's already so much talent there. There's already so much to see, so much to do, so much beauty to create there, that I really think there's going to be a massive amount of fruition as that comes forward, especially because Venus in Libra in that third house is ruling that 10th house of career success, where the MC is. Like, you're going to be famous for it, girl, and rightly so. Your words are a gift to the world. What comes out of your mouth, what runs through your head, is the embodiment of grace. So let's go ahead and also look at that moon conjunct Saturn in Gemini, retrograde in the 11th house of friendships. This is a little bit tricky. I've seen this placement a couple times before, and what it really speaks to me about is friendships holding you back. Because again, Saturn is going backwards. The moon being attached means that there's an emotional pull, there's emotional gravity that the moon is caught in with Saturn. And Saturn doesn't like to help things flourish. It likes to suppress. And so when we look at that 11th house of friendships, especially if you make friends through your writing, teaching, communication, there will be a lot of people that surround you who say, no, you shouldn't do that. It's too risky. And they might be right, but they're also coming from their own place of lack and insecurity, and they don't have the natural talent that you do. So I would say screw them, and I would say do it anyway, because the people that you're surrounding yourself with, they're good checks and balances. Like, it's good for the ego, it's good for the heart to be like, do I really want this? is this really the direction that I'm supposed to go? Like, we need a little bit of friction. We need a little bit of bondage in order to hold us back, to let us know what we really want in life. And I think that that's therapeutic, right? But when it comes to your friends, just know that there will be this constant feeling of them not being good enough and trying to convince you that you're not good enough too, right? So we just need to be aware of that. We also have Mars in Aquarius and the North Node in that seventh house being ruled by Saturn. So friends turning into lovers, vice versa, that's a thing. Because Mars is in Aquarius, being ruled by Saturn, Mars tends to make things hot. Mars tends to make things very aggressive, move forward at a very quick pace. Mars is actually just conjoined your natal Mars. You had a Mars return not too recently, so that was probably very spicy for your relationships. But Mars tends to have that really aggressive, competitive side, and I think that the spouse that you choose will really be a great cheerleader. But we need to be aware that they also have that martial tendency of just being a little bit too aggressive, which complements all of the Venus in your chart for sure, and brings out some of your Leo fire. But when it comes to your spouse also creating a slight opposition for you and being a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too stifling as well, that's part of the makeup. Then we have the Jupiter Neptune in the fifth, and this just speaks again towards that massive amount of creativity. Jupiter in Sagittarius and its ruling sign in the fifth house of creativity, absolutely massive, absolutely gorgeous. Neptune being here as well, there's an added dose of creativity. Neptune is technically a planet that I don't like to see in places. I like to see Neptune in the fifth when it's associated with so much creative fire. We just need to be aware that substances that are a little bit more hallucinogenic, definitely part of the makeup, but you are very sensitive to them. So although it might be nice to have like a glass of wine to fuel your creative fire, going too far in that realm is actually going to stifle creativity, because you already have so much of it. You don't need those things. You have so much grace and beauty in your words. They just fall out. You don't need to let that filter down, because your filter is innately gorgeous. Yeah, so that's that. Let's go ahead and look at, we have a couple more charts to look at. No, we have one more chart to look at, and we have about 4 or 5 minutes-ish to do it. We'll probably go over. Sorry for everybody on Instagram who's watching. We're going to cut off on Instagram first, because they won't let me do more than an hour. Yeah. Let's look at Charlotte. Charlotte was at 12:43 p.m. in Denison. She is Scorpio rising. Woo! So Scorpio rising at 21. We also have Neptune in Scorpio here in the first. So we just got done talking about Neptune. Let's talk about Neptune again. Neptune tends to bring an air of toxic mysticism, is a really great way to say it, especially with Scorpio there. Chemical sensitivity, bowel issues, especially chemicals that affect the gut, like caffeine. We need to be very, very hyper aware that that's going to be triggering and sensitizing to the system. Your body does not process chemicals well, and it's something physically that we just need to be hyper aware of, especially because you have so much happening in Virgo too. There's a lot in the gut that needs to be treated with a sense of safety, as opposed to reckless abandon when it comes to food choices and your addictions. Like we all have addictions. We all have things that we enjoy a little bit too much. But when it comes to the chemical nature of some of those addictions, your body tends to be hypersensitive to those right off the bat, Charlotte. So keeping that in mind. Let's see. We have Saturn and Aquarius in the fourth retrograde. That's a really tough family environment. That's a super tough break, Charlotte. I'm really sorry to see that. Whenever we have Scorpio ascendant, there's this fourth house Aquarius that naturally comes with it, but to have Saturn there too, there's a sense of especially the authority figure in the family, whoever that might have been, mother, father, doesn't really matter. being extra harsh, being extra isolative, pushing you away, either consciously or unconsciously, because Saturn in Aquarius is that person who tends to lock themselves in the library and shut everybody else out. That was the energy of your family dynamic. You could have done that for you, yeah, or your family dynamic could have done that to you. It's really kind of chicken or the egg at that point. But the idea of feeling socially isolated and not receiving the love that you needed from that family dynamic growing up, that's tough. But that's natural with Scorpio risings. It's just you have that in spades. Which is why I think you're such a good parent, because we have that Jupiter in Pisces. Although it's retrograde, it's still Jupiter in Pisces. In that fifth house of parenting, like one of the things that I think is really cool about your chart is that you've put your most prosperous planet in that fifth house of parenting and children, to make sure that anybody who you choose to adopt, really, or bring into the world, really does not go through that same cycle again. Let's see, we do have that Pluto in Virgo opposing that Jupiter retrograde, as well as Mercury in Virgo up in the 11th. That's some really interesting friendship choices, Charlotte, to put Uranus and Pluto up in the 11th with Virgo in the 11th. That's some real Dead Poet Society stuff. Like, it's very, and I mean that literally, like, because Pluto represents death, Mercury in Virgo is the poet. You'll get it. So the idea of Mercury and Virgo being in the 11th, friends are very intellectual. Friends are very smart, right? But we also have Pluto here, which is slightly toxic before the age of 50. So we have friends that you don't necessarily know how to handle, in those first 50 years of life. Then they mature, and then you start to realize, oh yeah, this is why I hang around them, because they're actually really good for me, as opposed to not necessarily being able to, again, like it's kind of, don't bite off more than you can chew. First 50 years, you bite off more than you can chew in the friendship department. But it also allows you to level up faster, is a good way to think about it. That Scorpio ascendant being ruled by Mars in Cancer up in the 9th. It wouldn't surprise me if you went to school for hospice care because of the death aspect. It wouldn't surprise me because, or going into nursing. Yeah, nursing, that'd be fun for you. Like, you have a couple caregiving markers in your chart with the Jupiter and Pisces in the 5th, that Mars in Cancer ruling the 6th house of work. But a lot of what your chart talks about is that attachment to higher education, travel, and foreigners. You'd be really good in the Peace Corps as well, with Mars ruling your chart and the 6th. So there's this idea of your chart specifically being in that higher education house, the Lord of your chart, speaking towards you constantly going out of your way to care for other people and learning how to do that more effectively, learning to be a better mom, learning to be a better at your chosen profession, those kinds of things. We also have Venus and Libra in the 12th. The 12th is the house of hidden enemies, but it is also the house of hospitalizations. So again, another marker that really talks about bringing that Venus and Libra, that Venusian grace, into that 12th house of death, and really creating a sense of ease, a sense of beauty around those things that are ugly, those things that are hidden, those things that are mysterious to a lot of people. And we have the moon in Gemini ruling that 11th house. When we find the 11th house ruling the 8th house, especially with the moon being here, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a death of a friend growing up when you were younger, which again, Scorpio tends to surround themselves with death anyway. So that's not really anything new, but it does bring forward a lot of those emotional triggers when you help people who are on the edge of that brush with death early on. And when it comes to your friends who are constantly surrounded by positive things like entrepreneurship, taxes, other people's money, that kind of thing. But then also on the negative side, there is that death card that keeps getting popped up for you specifically in your life that brings you a unique qualification to deal with those energies. And we do have the sun in Leo up in the 10th, which is just a grandiose personality. It is right on that cusp at 29, so there is a slight Virgo influence to that as well. And I think that that's what makes your sun so amicable to all of those 11th house Mercury Virgo energies of intellectual friends, because you've got that powerful personality and you're here to learn how to master that personality. But then you've also got this side to you that is very, again, Dead Poet Society. So it's a little bit about your chart, Charlotte. Cool. And we're at an hour and 3. So let's go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. I appreciate your support with another round of charts. Should you have the interest in jumping on and becoming a part of the lineup, feel free to send your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private message. We will add you to the list, to the queue, and I will message you the morning of when we do the live stream. And if you would like to schedule a private consult, or if you would like to take classes from me, you can always visit scorpiorisingastrology.com/consultations to find out more, or message me and we'll go back and forth on that. To answer some of the questions, yes, I do work with children's charts. You can always submit your children's charts with their consent. Consent is always very important. I don't care how young they are. That's part of them saying yes to being read, you know. And then also, what are some other questions that I got? Yes, I do need the exact time. If you do not have the exact time, we can rectify a chart, but that's something we have to do via consultation. Takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of one-on-one kind of question and answer. And yeah, we'll work through it together. But we will end the live stream for today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and may the stars be ever in your favor.